Started to talk to my sisters coming home from their service, 1/3 of whom are reporting military sexual trauma. They've been raped or sexually assaulted by their fellow servicemen while in service. 1/3. Do you know what we referred to women Marines as? WMs? Walking mattresses. That's what we would refer to them on base. So again, it shouldn't be a surprise. It's a culture built on patriarchy. It's a culture built on the notion and the idea that women are here, much like the planet, much like the third world, for us to exploit and use at our will. And so I started to think about that and started to work with women who have been raped. And psychologists and psychiatrists will tell you that there's only, besides killing someone or besides going through a traumatic experience of seeing grotesque violence, the only thing that's worse is being sexually assaulted or raped. So the women in the military, not only are they dealing with those visions and with those experiences of grotesque violence, they're also dealing with being raped and sexually assaulted at the hands of their fellow servicemen.
I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself. I trained as a combat medic. I joined straight out of high school. I was 17. My first experience with sexual harassment was with my recruiter. He was married and his wife was pregnant. And he used to make it a requirement for me to go with him and talk to other soldiers about joining the army and kind of reeling them in, you know. And so that was one thing. And then one night he got drunk and he had to stay at a hotel because his wife was mad at him or something. And he had me drive him to the hotel. And at the hotel, he came on to me and I was able to kind of weasel my way out of it and get out. That was my first brush with just the military and kind of sexual harassment. When I was in basic, drill sergeants were known to sleep with the trainees. I did not personally witness it or was it on me, but they were known. When I deployed, I was in a clinic. I worked sick call. I was a combat medic. And so I had this interest for working in, for looking at gruesome things because I wanted to see the good stuff, And I asked one of the surgeons that was there, I said, hey, is there a way that I can go to the operating room and watch a case? He's like, okay. Next day he came and he's like, do you want to start working there? I was like, yeah, sure. I started the next day at 7 o'clock in the morning. And through that whole deployment, I was harassed every single day. I dreaded every day I went to work because this person would catch me alone or catch me in a hallway and push himself against me with his hands behind his back. And I can tell you it's extremely difficult to do your job proficiently, efficiently, and correctly when there's someone that you have to look out for, your own people, your own comrades, your own supervisors. So basically what he was practicing was quid pro quo. I transferred you to the operating room, so therefore you need to give me something back. It never got to a physical point because he knew exactly what he was doing, and I never reported it because it was just, I knew command wasn't going to do anything about it, so there was no point. This person wasn't a person of a very extremely important position, and he had transferred me over, and all I kept thinking about was if I speak out, it's going to be my word against him, and I'm just an E4. I'm a specialist. So who are they going to believe? Are they going to get rid of the guy that's making all the decisions and saving lives, or me, the disposable specialist? And a lot of people say, why didn't you report it? It's so easy. No, it's not. You're looked at as a snitch for turning around and talking about your brothers and sisters and comrades that you're working with day in and day out. I joined trying to do something for my country, and I joined, trying to be patriotic. And the last thing I would have imagined would have been joining an organization where, by my own peers, by my own comrades, I would have been harassed in that way.
I was stationed in Saginaw River, Michigan. I was the only female in my section. I had a supervisor. It got to the place where I'd get calls at 3 o'clock in the morning and he'd be drunk at a bar telling me to come get him. And I'm like, I can't, I'm in bed. And he would then threaten me. I'd walk in from training and he'd be sleeping in my bed. When we went to one of the higher ups, the chain of command, they were all like his drinking buddy, and they told me just because I didn't like somebody, they weren't going to switch me away from this guy. It was in the evening around taps, and he'd unlock the door and he'd come in, and he had an erection, and he tried to get me to touch him. I took my right hand and I pushed him in the chest and started to yell for the other guys to kind of hear me, to hey, hey, hey. He hit me across the left side of my face. I remember holding the closet thinking, what just happened? And my face hurt so bad. And when we went to the command about it, me and the petty officer who saw my face, they let it wait because they didn't want any kind of problems going on. A couple weeks later, I needed the key to do my cleanup. So I knocked on his door, and he said, okay, yeah, come on in here, it's in here. And I said, no, I'm gonna wait out here. And he screamed at me, and he made me come in, and he grabbed my arm. And he raped me in his birthing area.
Females would come up to their commanders or their NCOs and say that they were either sexually assaulted or abused, and I don't think it was taken seriously. I think a lot of times a cursory investigation was done, and they were basically told to just suck it up.
I remember bringing in a young service member who had been brutally raped and bringing her in to see her command and trying to make sure that this young girl was taken care of properly. And this idiot chewed her out for crying, told her to stop crying over spilt milk.
A lot of times the credibility of the witness was called into account. Had the potential victim, had she made claims like this in the past. There was a lot of witch hunting going on.
I was ordered to advise a victim of her rights for false statement when I knew that she wasn't lying. I was asked to bring her in and advise her of her rights like a criminal and interrogate her for false statement, quote unquote, until I got the truth out of her. If a woman makes a rape complaint, there are always people asking what she was doing there, what she was wearing, whether she had a boyfriend or not.
I was blindsided. I dealt with sexual harassment. You know, I was one woman to every 60 men. And I had gone out one night, and normally I didn't. I kind of kept to myself a bit, and I went out, and that night I was drugged and I was raped by my sergeant, who was my chain of command. Meaning he was the person that if something happened to me, I have to go to report. And I reported it, and the more that I pushed for things to be done and for them to investigate it, the more repercussions came to me. Professionally, personally, you know, I was kind of blacklisted.
Military sexual violence is a very personal issue for me. During my 5 years as a Marine officer, I experienced daily discrimination and sexual harassment. I was exposed to a culture rife with sexism, rape jokes, pornography, and widespread commercial sexual exploitation of women and girls, both in the United States and overseas. My experiences came to a head while I was stationed at the School of Infantry at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina from 2002 to 2004, where I witnessed reports of rape, sexual assault, and sexual harassment swept under the rug by a handful of field-grade officers. Perpetrators were promoted or transferred to other units without punishment, while victims were accused of lying or exaggerating their claims in order to ruin men's reputations. As a company commander at the School of Infantry, I ultimately chose to sacrifice my own career to file an equal opportunity investigation against an offending officer. I was given a gag order by my commanding officer, got a military protection order against the officer in question, lived in fear of retaliation and violence from both the offender and my own chain of command, and then watched in horror as the offender was not only promoted, but also given command of my company. Many of the women who were impacted by these incidents, including me, are no longer in the military. However, all of the officers who were complicit in covering up these incidents have since retired or are still serving on active duty. The Department of Defense itself estimates that 19,300 assaults occurred in 2010, and that while 8,600 victims were female, 10,700 were male. This is a critical point. Military sexual violence is not a women's issue. Sexual assault is widely understood by military personnel who have been overexposed to a culture of victim blaming and rape mythology. So let's be clear. Rape and assault are violent, traumatic crimes, not mistakes, not lapses of professional judgment, not leadership failures, and not oversights in character. Rape is about power, control, and intimidation.
So when I first joined the Army, we were told that racism no longer existed in the military. A legacy of inequality and discrimination was suddenly washed away by something called the Equal Opportunity Program. And the Army seemed firmly dedicated to smashing any hint of racism. And then September 11th happened, and I began to hear new words like towel head and camel jockey, and the most disturbing, sand nigger. The most overt racism came from veterans of the first Gulf War. And those were the words they used when they were incinerating civilian convoys. Those are the words they used when this government deliberately targeted civilian infrastructure, bombing water supplies, knowing that it would kill hundreds of thousands of children. Those are the words the American people used when they allowed this government to sanction Iraq. And this is something that many people forget. Racism within the military has long been an important tool to justify the destruction and occupation of another country. It has long been used to justify the killing, subjugation, and torture of another people. Racism is a vital weapon employed by this government. It is a more important weapon than a rifle, a tank, a bomber, or a battleship. It is more destructive than an artillery shell, or a bunker buster, or a Tomahawk missile. While all those weapons are created and owned by this government, they are harmless without people willing to use them.
Well, we referred to people as sand niggers, as hajis, camel jockeys, towel heads. That's how we referred to people of Iraq and Afghanistan. That's how our command referred to them. That's how our drill instructors referred to them. That's how the officers referred to them. It's the only way you can get 17, 18, 19-year-old kids to fly 7,000 miles from home and kill people, is if those people aren't considered people. Much like in Vietnam, when people were considered rice paddies and zipper heads and gooks. The dehumanization process, the racism, the xenophobia is inherent, again, not only to the military training, but to Western culture and also American society.